On today's show, we're going to discuss Bill Zito's approach to this offseason versus last. We're going to discuss which Florida Panthers players are rumored to be extended, and should the Florida Panthers trade for Erik Carlson? We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Tuesday, June 20th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers, and as well on Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who are here, where the Florida Panthers are making a 3-1 series deficit to make a comeback, sweep the Carolina Hurricanes, and even make it to the Stanley Cup Final. And even now that we're in the offseason, and if you're an everydayer joining us during this time of year, thank you guys for coming back here for your daily Florida Panthers fix. So with now that we have had almost a week, I mean, going into Tuesday, it's going to be a whole week since the Florida Panthers have been eliminated from the Stanley Cup Final, and it's still going into this summer and still thinking about how the training camp is just 3 months away, with opening night being less than 4. Of course, the feelings are a lot better now than they were last season. Of course, you advance further and you feel better about the future of this team. But, last year, when you think about them being swept by the Tampa Bay Lightning, the year that you went for it, you wonder if, had that team plateaued, multiple years of not making the playoffs, of course, with Barkov, Huberdeau, and Ekblad, and then Bill Zito saying something has got to change. And then the mindset at that time was who was eligible for an extension there. And you see Huberdeau was a year away from a new contract. Uyghur was a year away from a new contract. And you think about, if you were to give those guys extensions, I mean, if you don't make the Matthew Tkachuk trade at all, Jonathan Huberdeau probably would have signed here by now, because you're not going to let him test the market in free agency. You're going to find a way to trade him at the deadline. And if the Panthers are contending, you're definitely not going to be sellers. So if there was a time to move Huberdeau, it was during the offseason last year. And you think about, once again, window for this Panthers team. After last season, you could even go back to last summer's recordings, that the window at that time was 1 to 2 years. And just imagine how close this Panthers team, if they had gotten with last year's group, if they decided to run it back, how much of a sense of urgency there would have been more to even make an even greater move to improve this roster for a core that's aging. And even last year, I was saying that Mackenzie Weegar was you get him for 1 more year and you let him walk, and you say, thanks for all your contributions. We got everything we got out of you for a 7th round pick, and thanks for the memories. But with the Panthers and them making this trade, excuse me, you're more confident that not guaranteeing that they are going to make the Stanley Cup Final every year, and this is hard to do. Like, the Panthers next year on paper, with all their freed up cap space, might look better. But going back to Paul Maurice's statement, it's all starts from square one. next year. But you have a good feeling that with a majority of the players from 2023, all the when you look at the expiring contracts, you only really one or two people you're looking at as if for guys that you might want to keep around. Gudis is one of them. Lucas Carlson is another. But that's the great thing about not only making the trade, but getting to the point that they did in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And with that as well, with the cap being reset, you think about going into this offseason. As of this moment, it's $10.2 million. Subject to change, obviously. But we've also seen the different sides of Bill Zito of going for it when necessary and taking a step back when necessary. Hell, he's even in the running for the Jim Gregory Award for GM of the Year for not making a single move, mind you. Sometimes the best move you can make is not making one. But at the same time, I'm thinking, don't let one playoff run for this Panthers team get you to the point where you have to be extremely impulsive when it comes to bringing players in, locking up to maybe a $9-10 million deal, just throwing that out there, that will mess up your cap long term, and even trading for someone long term, which is maybe a little bit of a tease going into a later segment on today's show. But I'm sure Bill Zito is thinking about all the flexibility. And of course, GMs all over the NHL are betting on the cap to go up. I mean, they were betting on last season that the cap was going to go up, and we're not going to see that. It's going to be 83.5 million for the NHL. And it results in, it's bad for the fans, it's bad for players, because you see someone in a crunch and then you see players being bought out too. So it's I mean, the Panthers went after two players actually, who got bought out by their former teams. Colin White was one of them. Michael Del Zotto was the other one. So it's a little bit of a tough situation for multiple teams who are up against the cap. And yeah, 10.2 is there, but if you really think about it, in actuality, it's not as much as we really think it is. And almost 15 million is tied up in your goalie contract too. So, but still, going into this offseason, of course, a lot better when it comes to freed up space, because after July 1 of last year, well, not July 1, but free agency was delayed a little bit. But after day one of free agency, you saw the inability for the Panthers to re-sign a Mason Marchment, Ben Sherratt, and Claude Giroux. And man, was that a bummer at the time. But now, looking forward to it, you see that there's a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more of a sigh of relief, and also an ability to look forward and forecast who are the guys to prioritize, who are the guys that you see as let's wait and see when it comes to not only guys who you want to bring in as a first wave of free agency, but also the guys who are a year away from becoming UFAs. And that's where we're gonna lead into our second segment, where we're gonna talk about who are the Panthers rumored to try to extend with a year left on their contracts. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about eBay Motors. And for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to my garage and look for the green check so you know the right part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Second segment here on this June 20th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And Jeff Merrick and Elliot Freeman had a conversation on 32 Thoughts. And we're going to discuss more about what they talked about on 32 Thoughts in segment number 3 as well. So there's a lot of topics that they discussed that we are going to rehash here, because last week they spoke about how of course they talk about what happens with the Stanley Cup winners, and of course they talk about what happens of course now with the losers of the Stanley Cup. And the rumors are from Elliot Freeman about the guys that they want to look at as far as possible extensions. And the names that we only hear as far as those are Gus Forsling and Brandon Montour. Those are the only ones that we know. Any of the forwards that on the Panthers roster, as far as guys that are a year away from becoming UFAs, we're going to discuss mostly UFAs on today's show. We're going to discuss RFAs on Wednesday with Jacob Winans on Winans Wednesday. But you think about guys on the forward who are UFAs next year: Sam Reinhart, Anthony Duclair, Nick Cousins, Ryan Lomberg. But the real priority, from what Elliot Freeman is reporting, are two guys in the top 4: Brandon Montour, Gus Forsling. As far as the one who are UFAs this year, Casey Fitzgerald's likely gone. Mark Stahl's gone. Radko Gudas, he's likely going to want to get paid, and the Panthers are probably not going to be able to give him the term, maybe the cap hit that they can put on the books, but not necessarily the term that Radko Gudas might want. Lucas Carlson's a wild card as far as whether he's going to come back or not, but he didn't reach the eligible amount of games for him to have RFA status, which is why he is a UFA this coming offseason. But Brandon Montour, Gus Forsling. And to think that combined, you only had to spend a 3rd round pick for both of them combined. The 2021 season, traded for Brandon Montour in the deadline, and then Gus Forsling was a waiver claim before the season even started from Carolina. And you think about what they're making now. And Brandon Montour is 3.5. And let's also not forget that Brandon Montour was actually given a contract too before free agency of 2021 as well. He was an expiring contract then. They gave him a contract then. Same thing with Gus Forsling. He was a guy who was protected in the expansion draft. That's why you bought out the likes of a Keith Yandel, which, once again, the Panthers are going to get some relief after that, after going through their so-called gap year. So I will say this. I don't see either of them as far as term 8 years. But as far as AAV, if you can get Brandon Montour, well, before I get there, hold on. I'm going to hold that thought. This is for Brandon Montour specifically. This is something that you might want to wait out, because the torn labrum that he has, it's Paul Maurice didn't necessarily confirm who will miss the start of training camp, but with the production that kind of fell off after the Boston series for Brandon Montour, it was a little bit concerning for him, especially a guy who was the quarterback on the power play, who basically took that spot and ran with it, basically. And lots of praise, once again, from Paul Maurice to Brandon Montour as well. Gus Forsling was asked to do a lot as a first-pair defenseman, with Mackenzie Weegar being shipped out, 27 years old, going into 28 this coming season. Uh, Gus Forsling will be just turned 27, actually. Brandon Montour will turn 30 next April. So with Monty Montour, you got to wonder how that shoulder is going to hold up for him. So if you're going to extend them, I don't think it's going to be before the season starts. It's likely going to be something that's going to wait probably until next year's trade deadline. I could probably see more of it happening for Gus Forsling, and he's probably going to look for something around maybe $4 million. And for age 27, if you were to do that for 3-4 years, by all means, I think that's a really good deal on both sides. But it depends. What does Gus Forsling see as his worth? And in the middle of the season, if you're an everydayer, you can go back to the times that I've said, if there's anyone who's happy that Brandon Montour is not a UFA this specific season, it's Bill Zito. Because there's no guarantee as well that Monty will have the production that he did as far as points, breaking the record for most points in a season by a defenseman, passing Keith Yandel. So lots of question to ask of who are the guys that Florida wants to extend. And the rumors have it, based on Elliot Friedman of 32 Thoughts, it's those two. And once again, the cap possibly going up. We can only work in that world as far as that. And it's and you got to wonder if Bill Zito also sees Gus Forsling as a number one long term for this team too. I think there needs to be. I think he's more suited as a 2, in my opinion. So you might want to lower the minutes for Gus Forsling, because there have been times where we've seen him struggle with his breakouts as well. But also Gus Forsling, gotta give credit. That dude's a warrior. As far as injuries, as far as guys missing time, as far as guys, whether they're missing the early parts of training camp next season, I am shocked that we didn't hear Gus Forsling's name, because the amount of times that man went to the locker room and came back after blocking shot after shot, and him grimacing, limping to the bench, getting checked by trainers. Whew. Like, that dude's a warrior, and that's a guy you want on your team as well. So I'm very okay with the Panthers if they want to go ahead and extend Gus Forsling, by all means. And he's played a more valuable role in the special teams department too, as far as the PK unit as well. So from waiver claim to top pair defenseman, it's a pretty good story from Gus Forsling. And Gus also posted on his Instagram today thanking the fans for the ride this year. Also, Anthony Duclair did as well. He also was a guy who thanked the fans as well. So yeah, those are some of the guys who are rumored to possibly get extensions, but those are the upcoming UFAs for next year. As far as the forwards, I can see Anthony Duclair still being here, but the big cap hit as far as relief, Jacob and I spoke about this in the post game last Tuesday. The big one as far as a possible trade is Sam Reinhart. That's one to, even though you'd be happy to see him here next year, but if Zito's looking for a big cap relief on his roster, that's one that you're likely looking at. In segment number 3, we are going to discuss the rumor of Florida possibly being involved in a trade for about to be 3-time Norris Trophy winner Erik Carlsson. Is it worth giving up a lot for him? Is he a guy that can take the Panthers over the top? We're going to discuss this next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Tuesday, June 20th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And in that same show, like of 32 Thoughts with Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman, it's funny because Merrick a few weeks ago was saying who he wonders could be a fit for Erik Carlson. And he said he wonders if it's the Florida Panthers, but he said he was wondering. There was no reporting behind it at the time. And this was weeks ago. I think this was even before the playoffs even started. But then the latest conversation that he had with Friedman, Fried spoke about how it's more than just wondering. There is possible smoke to that fire with the Florida Panthers possibly being involved in a trade for Erik Carlson, the about to be three-time Norris Trophy winner. And let's be real, the Norris Trophy is about offensive defensemen. It has nothing to do, not necessarily nothing, but it has very little to do with how you play on the defensive end. So there needs to be a defensive defenseman award for that. But that's not flashy. That's not sexy to people as far as what a great defenseman is, quote unquote. But as far as Erik Carlson, 4 more years at $11.5 million with a full no movement clause. It's all throughout from beginning all the way to end at $11.5 million. And you think about coming into the season, base salary is 10.5. The big signing bonuses don't come until really the end of the contract. $5 million in 2025-26, $6 million in 26-27 as well. So it's so the way the contract is structured is a little difficult for the Panthers as well if they're to make this trade. And the San Jose Sharks have been very sticking to their guns, at least during the trade deadline, about 18%, the percentage that they want to keep around for Erik Karlsson's contract. That might change. We don't know at the moment. 18% retained for San Jose would have the Panthers paying about $9.4 million for Erik Karlsson. And going back to 2018, 2019, he hadn't played more than 56 games in a season. He had this past season, healthiest he's ever been in a while. 101 points, 34 more than the next closest. And as far as the defensive side, he's not really up there as far as goals against down there because less goals. He's not really up there as far as the goals against per 60, but he does log a lot of ice time. As far as that, even strike time on ice is 2150 a night. Also, here's another interesting stat: PDO, which is shooting percentage / save percentage when on the ice. Carlson was 13th on the Sharks last year as far as best PDO. And sometimes 101 points can mask what happens on the defensive end. And yeah, the San Jose Sharks were a not so great team all around. Of course, they were obviously trying to tank for Connor Bedard, and they ended up with the 4th overall pick this year. So they might be in the market for Michkov in the upcoming NHL entry draft. But as far as what the Panthers need, and we saw even in the last two postseasons, the teams that they got eliminated against, what is the key to winning? It's eating pucks and protecting your goaltender, and of course the timely goaltending. Sergei Bobrovsky did, of course, such a great job with with uh with the Panthers during this postseason run, especially in rounds 2 and 3. But what happens when the defense is letting them down and they're not getting in front of pucks versus what the opposition did in Vegas? I mean, just reading off the stats, as far as block shots for the last 2 years of the when the Panthers were eliminated, 2022 when they got eliminated by Tampa Bay Lightning. These are total shot blocks throughout the whole postseason for the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2022. Ryan McDonough, 69. Erik Chernak, 45. Victor Hedman, 42. Mikhail Sergachev, 42. This year's Vegas Golden Knights, who eliminated the Panthers. Alec Martinez, 57. Pietrangelo, 55. McNabb, 54. Zach Whitecloud, 40. And Carlson is he's not up there as far as most shot blocks for the San Jose Sharks this past year. So what the Panthers need is a guy responsible in their own end as well. And as you can see, if you're watching this on the YouTube, another name that's mentioned here as far as the timeline of show topics, Oliver Ekman-Larsson as well. He just got bought out by the Vancouver Canucks, who are going to be paying his contract for the next 8 years. He was making $8.25 million AAV with a full no move clause, and that's another offensive defenseman that this would require a free agent signing, no trade. But even then, I wouldn't want to bring him in for the Panthers, because just like Erik Carlson, he doesn't log a lot of PK minutes. And if you're expecting to lose Mark Stahl and Radko Gudas, you need to put someone there as far as logging PK minutes, unless Brandon Montour decides to take a bigger role as far as PK minutes as well. So it depends as well. And for the Canucks, Luke Schenn played one more game than Oliver Ekman-Larsson and had 40 more block shots than OEL. So I'm not subscribed to the whole Oliver Ekman-Larsson signing with the Florida Panthers, nor the Florida Panthers trading for Erik Karlsson. And of course, what it would take to trade for him too. Let's think about that. If you want the San Jose Sharks to retain more, that means you got to give up more as well. Yeah, could the San Jose Sharks afford to have it on their cap as they are not going to be competitive for the next few years? Absolutely. But you're going to have to pay up if you want to get that cap hit even down to 7. You don't have a first round pick till 2026. Yeah, Grigory Denisenko is an RFA that you're going to have to try to find a way to sign, which again, we'll talk on Wednesday, but that's possibly someone that you would include in a trade. Mackie Simiskevich as well, and probably some other picks as far as a combination of them to get Erik Karlsson here. And I don't know if that's worth it, especially with the injuries and that large cap hit too. And like I said in the first segment, you don't want to let one unexpected playoff run have you so impulsive to the point where you are again last year. And when it comes to making moves, that you have to play the cap gymnastics, and that it might screw someone over or have them placed on waivers in mid-season. And is that worth it? I don't think so. A few players that are on the free agent block this year, and we'll get more into trades probably later in the week. But as far as free agents, one person that I've been looking at is Scott Mayfield of the New York Islanders. And some of you are reading that name and think, oh, is that the guy who hurt Barkov last year and got a 5-minute major and that took Barkov out for a few weeks? Yes, that's the guy. But accidents do happen. I don't think that was intentional. But of course, with Barkov not returning, of course, the 5-minute major had to be assessed. But as far as a guy, as far as size, 6'5", 220, 5 inches taller than Gudas, 15 pounds heavier too. That's what the Panthers need. They need someone heavy. And he's a right-handed shot, can be placed on that third line with Josh Mahura if the Panthers choose Josh Mahura to be on that third pair come next season. Didn't really call his name much for wrong reasons outside of the Stanley Cup Final last year. And played all 82 games. And last year he was making 1.4, age 30. He's a guy that you could possibly bring in for a 1 or 2 year deal who might not cost you as much as what Radko Gudas might. Dmitry Orlov might be a little bit expensive for the Florida Panthers. He might want to get a really big payday come free agency, as much as Dmitry Orlov would be great. I think as far as what the Panthers can do is solidifying that bottom pair and then getting someone in the middle or even top, you could at least have Scott Mayfield in the third. And he logged the most PK minutes for the New York Islanders this past year as well. And he can hit. That dude can lay the lumber. Another one is a little bit of a younger guy, Ryan Graves. Doesn't hit as much as Scott Mayfield, but he's a guy who can get under your skin as well. I think he's been suspended also a few times in his career for some huge hits, but also Radko Gudas had that reputation prior to being a Florida Panther, and Radko Gudas hasn't been in trouble for on ice related things this year. And Ryan Graves made just north of three million last year, and he might be looking for a higher AAV. So it might be a little tougher to sign Ryan Graves at 28 years old versus what Scott Mayfield what was making last year. But as far as guys as far as bargain signings, low risk, high reward, I think that is a better risk than Erik Carlson. Yeah, you're going to get the offensive production. There's no doubt about that. But as far as what is needed, as far as help on the defensive end, I just, for what you have to give up, I'm really not sure if it's worth it for the Panthers. But you know what? If they do end up making the trade, we deal with it, and we can talk more about how Erik Carlson fits with this team, because I'm sure the players in the locker room will be excited to have him there regardless. This is a guy who's going to be a Hall of Famer one day. But I remember when the Panthers signed Sergei Bobrovsky to that 7-year deal, there's a part of me that was very excited, but then looking at the years, if you're watching on the YouTube, kind of like this, hands behind the head and just like, is this good? Is this bad? I don't know. But this playoff run, at least for the Bobrovsky contract, we saw the good of it. Hopefully it continues, obviously. But 4 years of Karlsson, where you don't know where the injuries lie, and as far as the performance, can he live up to those 101 points? That's something that you got to ask if you're Bill Zito. On tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, it'll be a Wine-Ins Wednesday edition of the show. We're going to discuss more of the RFAs on the roster, the ones of this year and next year, of who the Panthers are looking to extend, or maybe even trade for certain RFAs from other teams. We're going to discuss that on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steve Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.